the expressions on the face of Putin, of Modi, and of Xi, they're relaxed. There's no tension, and the laughs are genuine. Now, so some really funny memes have popped up on social media. For example, one of the memes shows them laughing, and the subtitle says, "Yeah," and Donald Trump thinks his tariffs are going to work, and it shows them laughing. Or another one said, "Hey, did you hear Macron's wife is a dude?" Or I mean, it was just people had fun with it. But what this really illustrated is these three countries, and maybe Trump does deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for this. Because through his efforts, through his actions, Trump has brought these three countries together in the closest relationship they've had in history, in recorded history. There's never been a situation where Russia, India, and China were talking and pledging to cooperate in this manner. And they represent there are the five top economies in the world. The United States is one of those five. The other four include India, China, and Russia. So three of those top five were right there represented. Now that's some economic power. And the difference right now is, whereas the United States has a debt to GDP ratio of 125%, which means we're spending a lot more money than we're bringing in. Each one of those countries, India, I think, has the worst debt to GDP ratio, and it's only at 74%. Russia's at 19%. But their economies, India's got the fastest growing economy right now, followed by China. Russia's is at 1.5% for this year because they took measures to counter inflation. But all those economies are growing, and they represent more people. The almost 3 million people, 3 billion people represented by those three countries, with China and India being the lion's share. In the United States, with 340 million. And then, as you noted in the earlier remarks, if you simply stayed up and watched the Chinese military parade, you compare what that was to that thing that Trump put on, and Trump was so proud. He reminds me of a kid that has got a soapbox derby racer, and it's just been built out of cardboard and such. Man, he's proud of it, and good for the kid. But don't compare yourself to a Formula One race car driver, okay? And that's what we saw there. China was driving in a Formula One race car, and Trump was in a soapbox derby car. And It's just jealous.
Listen, I served a full career in the military, very proud of the service that I gave in the U.S. Army. But, man, you can't be honest and not say the dramatic gulf between what was put on there. And people can say, okay, well, that was a parade. They do parades better than we do, but it's the muscle that counts. Yeah, I'm not so sure that isn't also falling in the favor of the Chinese and the Russians right now.
Yeah, well, just the drill to get those guys marching in unison and marching the way they did, people don't understand how difficult that is. So if you can organize and train an event like that, maybe you're pretty good at organizing and training some other things that pertain to warfare, because it's always in the details. If you're sloppy about the details, and when we had U.S. military personnel walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, they were out of step. They weren't in unison. They weren't in sync.
I saw
it. And you know what that means is you just don't give a shit. I mean, it's lack of caring. This showed they cared. Whoever was in charge of that, and he said, look, we don't want these people. And it wasn't just that one group marching. Every single thing that was done was scripted, organized, and it's like it was done by animatronics.
And even though referring back to the people during our parade this summer that were out of step, Larry, I remembered at the time watching this. I remember when I was in 1985, Private Daniel Davis, at basic training. By the end of that 6 weeks, we were marching in lockstep, and that was a major thing that they wanted to teach us to work together and all that. And we were in lockstep, and I'm thinking, how can this not be in lockstep at least? And okay, we can't match this, but gracious, I mean, they weren't even in step.
Yeah. And I mean, and here you weren't just dealing with 20 guys or 50 guys. You were dealing with thousands, and they pulled it off, and in a way that is truly remarkable. Now you're right; that doesn't necessarily translate to combat effectiveness on the battlefield. But it's certainly a contributing factor that do you have the planning capability to prepare and then execute a task? And that's what was demonstrated here by the Chinese in a remarkable way.
Now, I haven't seen any specific reports on it, but I can just imagine and wonder what your thoughts are that the closeness between the Russian and Chinese militaries, that their lessons learned that they're learning on the battlefield in Ukraine, I would certainly imagine are being transferred over to the Chinese side. So when they're training on the modern aspects of real war, what it's really like on the ground. And I don't think anyone can question that China has a significant military technological advantage over anyone in the West. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's correct. And again, you go back and look at the Rand Corporation report that was written in 2019, and then the other report that was done by A. Wes Mitchell that was published in National Interest in August of 2021, but was prepared for the Pentagon and given to them in December of 2020. Both of these reports focused upon creating a situation that they said we can't have a situation where China and Russia come together. So we've got to come up with a strategy to split them apart. And the way to split them apart is to get Russia into a war, weaken Russia, defeat Russia, force Russia to come recognize that the West is superior, and then we can go after China. Well, clearly that strategy is no longer working. And as they've come together, the cooperation has not just been economic, it's not just been political, but it has been military. And China's been able to supply Russia with some things, but Russia is also supplying China with some critical needed oil and gas. So this is not a lopsided relationship. This is a relationship of mutual respect.
And I wonder if you can go down that path, because one of the other things that Putin said today, and I don't have this soundbite, he was talking about a new pipeline and gas project he has, which is going to ensure that more of the Russian oil and gas goes to China. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this pipeline is going to basically bring in gas and oil from as far away as Siberia into China. This is really a diversion of oil and gas that used to go to Europe. So right now, Putin is demonstrating that they're making a clear break with before Russia was still wanting to be part of Europe. Hey, can't we be part of you? Made repeated requests and always rebuffed. By starting with George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, all rebuffed. So Russia is now saying, okay, we're turning east. And this is, once that pipeline's in place, China's got another secure source of oil and gas where it doesn't have to worry about tankers getting interdicted on the high seas.
So correct me if I'm wrong also, but that implies then that even once this war is over, unlike what was talked about in earlier rounds, once the war could be over, then the West and East could get back to turning the gas on, and they could get that cheap gas on to revitalize their Western economies. But now it looks like that Russia is in a position that gas, that cheap gas, ain't coming back to Europe. Is that right?
Yeah, they're not making that a priority. They will. Russia remains, at least under Putin, open to trying to reestablish relationships with all of Europe. They continue to sell oil and gas primarily to Slovakia and Hungary. What's really interesting is if you look at who Russia is trading with, you find that a number of European countries and the United States, despite all the sanctions, we continue to import from Russia.
That is
Okay.
crazy.
So, that's why I say, don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. And, the fact of the matter is, Russia is blessed with natural resources that 99% of the other countries in the world don't have. And Russia is more than happy to export those, but it's going to be done on a reciprocal basis of respect. And it's going to be done in accordance with what benefits Russia economically. And instead, the West is obsessed with fighting Russia, destroying Russia. It's crazy.
Yeah, and bitterly failing. I'll add in there too. One of the things that has been a source of recent mocking, I want to say the last time we had you on here, maybe it was the time before, we showed a soundbite from Emmanuel Macron where he was mocking the Russian military, saying, well, since November of 2023, they've only taken 1 additional % of Ukrainian territory. So they're not all that great. It's not for sure they're going to win, etc.
Yeah.
And Vladimir Putin today spoke about that situation where he said, it's not really about territory, it's about the people.
To be honest, I want to emphasize this. We are fighting not so much for territories, but for human rights and for the rights of people who live in these territories, to speak their own language, to live within the framework of their culture, within the framework of traditions that have been passed down from previous generations, from their fathers, from their grandfathers, and so on. This is, first of all, what we are talking about. And if these people, during electoral democratic procedures, including during referendums, spoke out in favor of being part of the Russian Federation, this opinion must be respected.
Now, many in the West will say, you're just trying to put a good face on it. You actually can't take any more territory. That's why you haven't. And Russia doesn't care anything about people. They just throw their guys in meat wave tactics all the time anyway. What do you say?
Well, it's just simply not true. So let's start with the territorial interest. One of the arguments is, look, Russia only has 19% of Ukraine. Okay, this is a lawyer's lie, a math trick. Yeah, if you take all of Ukraine and measure the Donbass and that territory, yeah, it only represents like 19% of Ukraine. Russia's not fighting for the 60% of Ukraine that is west of the Dnieper River. They are concerned about the 40% of Ukraine that's to the east of the river. So all of a sudden, instead of Russia only like 19%, they're closer to controlling 40% of all that territory, except they're not going into Poltava, Sumy. They're in Sumy a little bit. They're in Kherson a little bit, Dnipropetrovsk a little bit. But the fact is, of the areas that they focused on from the outset, the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, they're well over 80%. And they've made it very clear. They're not about the launch. If they were launching human wave attacks, the bodies of the Russian soldiers would be stacked up. And when it comes time to exchange dead cadavers, that the Ukrainians would be turning over more Russians than the Russians were turning over Ukrainians. But that hasn't been the case. This last exchange of bodies, for every single dead Russian, there were 20 dead. Or it was 20. It was a 50 times 1 to 50 ratio.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So 19 dead Russians and 1,000 dead Ukrainians. Now people say, "Well, see, though, that's just because the Russians are advancing." Exactly. Yeah.
Let's go with it. Yeah. Actually, that's
let's use that. Let's use that argument. Because you're just telling me that they weren't making any progress. So which is it? They're not making any progress. They're launching human wave attacks that are getting slaughtered, but the bodies don't show up, or they're advancing so quickly the Ukrainians don't have a chance to recover the dead Russians. Oh, I mean, like I said, there's no consistent logic with these people. They're morons.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of examples of that. I want to shift back real quick to this strategic view and this shifting world order that you mentioned a minute ago.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Putin also addressed in his press conference today in Beijing was this idea that President Trump is trying to or threatening to rather have big sanctions on Russia, but then secondary tariffs on China, India, and Brazil. That's one of the things that he still says he's got in his quiver and still thinking about doing it. And Putin was asked, can Trump do that? Are we at risk? And here's what he's had to say.
You have countries like India, almost 1.5 billion people, China, with powerful economies, but they also have their own domestic political mechanisms and laws. So when somebody tells you that they're going to punish you, you have to think, how can the leadership of those countries, of those big countries, which had difficult periods in their history too, that had to do with colonialism, with attacks on their sovereignty during prolonged periods of time, you have to understand that if one of them shows weakness, his political career will be over.
So what do you make of that? Because I don't think it was just by happenstance that he mentioned the colonial past, especially when it comes to India, that they can be coerced to do what the West, i.e. the United States, wants them to do.
Yeah, what has emerged now over the course of the last 3.5 years since the start of the special military operation is the dream of BRICS, of having this independent financial trading economic system that was outside of the reach of the United States, that it would become a reality. It has now become a reality. And it's becoming a reality much quicker than I think even Putin, Xi, and even Modi would have expected. You know, a year ago, Modi wasn't that enthusiastic about BRICS. You know, it was, I was attending, but it wasn't really the top of his priority. Now it's a priority. And Trump's use of tariffs, and we can talk about this a little bit later, it's predicated on a lot of false assumptions. And, you know, right now it is true that when you if you asked who are the top 10 countries that send goods, that export goods to the United States, well, India's in that top 10. They're the last of that. They're between 85 and 91 billion dollars, which is like, you know, 9% or less of the total trade. Well, that's not a lot. And in terms of India's own trade, it makes up 3% of their GDP or less, you know, 2.3%. So it's one of these issues that it's not essential for India's economic survival to have trade with the United States. Yet Donald Trump right now is pretending he reminds me of the guy who used to sell buggy whips before the automobile was really introduced. And so buggy whips were in demand because everybody's driving a buggy. But all of a sudden, then Henry Ford kicks in and starts putting out the Model A's, the Model T's. All of a sudden, he's got all these buggy whips nobody's buying. Or the same, you know, I grew up where you go out and get your 35 millimeter roll of film, put it in that camera.
I do remember that, yeah.
You have to thread it in there. Boy, that was the thing. Kodak was the king. Now, who knows Kodak? People go, what? Are we talking about the bear in Alaska?
Yeah.
So, and this is what's happening to the United States.